Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where I get to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in our communities. What did they do to get started? And what are they doing to stay there? And oh my goodness, here we are already in September of 2023. And I am bringing you another special guest. Today, I'm getting to talk to Christie Engler. Christie, well, she's the Director of People Operations and Culture at Willory. She's also an author. And Christie, I'm so excited to have you on the show. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks, Bruce. So excited to be here.
I will tell you, I am so excited to have you on today. Now, for those that are listening, Christie is sporting her Ohio State Buckeyes hat today, and her shirt, the Ohio State University. I love that. I'm sure she's going to plug the Ohio State University in the show today. I always like to reflect, though, when I met my guest. And for you, we connected online. It might have been through a Twitter chat or through the HR community, but I remember the first time I met you was at the SHRM conference, and I believe you were speaking at that event. Do you remember that?
Sure did.
That would have been SHRM 21.
Yep.
I remember watching you speak. You did a phenomenal job. But what impressed me about that particular session was that you not only spoke, but you also gave away books. And not just gave away books or your book, you gave away some of your favorite authors' books. And I thought that was a little different and really cool. What drove you to do that?
So my session was geared towards HR for smaller business, which has always been my lane for the last 20 years. And when you're working in small business and you're working with entrepreneurs or a department of one, you don't have all the resources that a lot of people do in larger corporations and with larger departments. And sometimes even buying books of people that you really want to can be a challenge. And a lot of times those folks end up doing that out of their own pocket as opposed to on the company dime. And so that means something to me, and I've been there. And so I wanted to give those away as much as I can. And so I started collecting from some of my favorites, yourself included. Started gathering those up, and everybody was so gracious to mail those to me and send those. Anybody who assisted with my presentation, I gave them away.
I think I was sitting next to the great Jeff Palkowski during that session, and there were a lot of others in there. I think Kyra might have been in there, Mary, so many, Paula.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention that, and the reason really why I wanted to mention that is because there's a big HR community that listen to the show, HR business leaders, mobility leaders, but a lot of them don't have the resources. They're small. We can say departments of one, they just don't have bandwidth regardless. And there's a way to create a 5-star experience in a lot of different ways. And one of those ways is what you did. You basically just reached out to some of your friends and said, hey, I'm going to be speaking. Would you like to donate a book? Most of them want to do that. And next thing you know, you have a collection of books and you give out, and it's just a win-win-win, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. At that time, so many had new books coming out as well. Yeah. Julie Turney, Lori Ruderman, a lot of those, were new authors coming out, and they were more than happy to share.
Yeah.
And kind of get that out. So it was excellent.
Yeah. Lori Ruderman, betting on you.
Yep.
That's fantastic. There's just so many. And of course, you have a book called People Fusion that you are part of. And I love that. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. Hey, I want to get to know the Christie Engler story. But before we do that, I would love for you to just share a brief highlight of who Willory is and how you serve your customers.
So Willory is an HR and payroll staffing and HRIS consulting solution. And we serve customers actually across the globe, helping with everything from HRIS selection, implementation, support, ongoing, payroll processing, and then also helping to find the talent to go with that. So HR roles, payroll roles specifically are our niche. So we kind of put those two things together and help clients not only get the technology, implement it, but also find the right people to work on it.
I love that. And I love whenever guests are able to come on and talk a little bit about their organization so others can know who they are and how you serve them. Hey, I would love to hear your story, the Christie Engler story. Like, where did you grow up and how in the world did you get into HR and leadership and being an author and speaking?
So I'm originally from the Toledo, Ohio area.
Hmm.
And I was born a Buckeye Bruce. Woody Hayes was my grandfather's personal hero. And so I was actually the first in my family to go to Ohio State. So it was a big deal. And I actually, from the time I was 3, I told everybody I was going to be the president of the United States. That was it.
I love
And so
that.
then I was, about 5, and I said, I should probably do something else, because you got to be 35 in order to be elected and get on the ballot. And so I decided I was going to be an attorney. I was going to be a lawyer. And that actually carried me all the way through high school graduation. And when I entered the Ohio State University, that was my intention, was to go to law school. So I started as a political science major, did all that. They created a new minor program that was for students in arts and sciences that focused on business. And so I was really intrigued because I've always had business interests. And so I got into that program. One of the classes that I took was kind of an HR 101 overview course. And I was a junior, and I physically remember sitting in the room. It was in Schoenbaum Hall, and it just clicked for me. And there was something that said, this is it. This is what you're supposed to be doing. This is really cool, helping people through work. So that was it. So I shifted courses. I stayed with political science because I was already so far into it, but got that minor. And then instead of law school, I went to graduate school to get a master's in HR.
That's fantastic. I love how the moments in time just sit with this. As you
Yep.
mentioned that, Schellenbaum Hall, how
Yeah.
you said, I remember sitting in that room
Yep.
and it just clicked. I love that. Okay, so
Yeah.
what'd you do after school? You got out. You're like, okay, well, I'm HR. What am I going to do now?
So I actually started in association management and event planning.
Oh,
So,
really? I did not
at
know
that
that.
time,
Okay.
it was so difficult to get a job in HR. I mean, it was
Yeah.
like pulling teeth. You were clawing
Yeah.
your way in. So I actually did that. I got married, and then I actually got my first break in 2005 and took a truly, really an administrative role, but it was with an outsourcing company, with an HR outsourcing company. And really that was just the start of it. From there, within that organization, I had a ton of opportunity. I learned so much. I started processing unemployment. That was my first real HR role, filling in for the generalists and the HR business partners who were working with clients, and not only really fell more in love with HR, but with the outsourcing world.
Yeah.
So that really kind of that was the start for me.
Yeah. I love that. And here you are today, serving in HR. I always like to ask the question, back then you were going to be a lawyer and then you decided,
Right.
hey, I'm going to change lanes. I'm going to go in this direction. But here you are later in your career. And as you look back, was there a moment when you found your lane, when you found your calling, your purpose? You're like, hey, I made, the choice I made. I love what I do.
The PEO company for several years. And so I was actually promoted a few times. And when I actually stepped into an HR business partner role where I was really working hands-on with clients on bigger issues, strategic projects, that kind of thing, that was really when I was seriously coming to work every day saying, I love this. I
Mm,
love this. Getting up is not an issue. It's not a task or a chore, but really getting to work with those clients, help them solve their business problems through, their people strategy. And I just became truly a trusted advisor to them. And
mm,
they started calling me on things that had nothing to do with HR because they trusted me and because I put in the time to get to know them, know their business, understand what's going on. And quite frankly, I'm just very direct and matter of fact. And sometimes if they're doing the wrong thing, I'm like, hey, let's talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I'm not gonna hide it from you. But what you're doing is the wrong thing. Let's think about it differently. And they appreciated that about me and respected me for it. And so it was just absolutely fantastic. And there were some clients that I went on to work with for nearly 10 years.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I
Yeah.
always like to talk about mentors because I think that great leaders have a common thread, and high performers, and that they have people in their lives that helped them get to where they wanted to go. I'm curious if you maybe had a couple of people that helped you, and if so, what was it that made them such a good mentor, Christie?
Well, I think starting out, my number one has always been my dad.
Mm.
And my dad and I are very similar and very close. And we actually refer to each other as the apple from the tree. Um,
I love that.
so we also are going to Buckeye games is our thing. So we have the season tickets. We decide what games we're going to, and then we let the
Mm.
rest of the family go after that. So
I love it. I love it.
it's our thing.
And I can resonate with that because I'm a season ticket holder for the Sooners,
Uh-huh.
and our seats, I go with my mom and my
Yep.
brother and my sister and our family and all there. So I get that. It's a
Yeah.
bond like no other. I love
Right.
that.
So, but he's been a very successful businessman, complete 100% built from himself. He came from very meager beginnings and very, very self-made individual. And, he and my mom just built this amazing life, amazing family. And I've just always admired that about him, but also that he's just very so direct, but caring and has been extremely successful. So, and one of the things with me is from the beginning, always told me I could do anything,
Mm,
always believed in me. I'll tell you, a lot of women don't have that still in this day and age. They're still not necessarily expected to be through the roof successful in business and in careers. And there's a lot of women who are not encouraged when they're young. And so I was lucky to have that.
yeah. There's nothing like having somebody believe in you, is there?
Right.
Yeah, I love it whenever guests come on the show and I ask them about mentors and they immediately go to family.
Yeah.
I love that because I've had family members, my mother and my father have shown me the way. My brother's been a big part of my life, but
Yeah.
my career journey. And it's all through encouragement. It's all
Right.
through belief. It's all through, hey,
Right.
go chase it.
Right.
And
Right.
I love that when people share that about belief. It's so important. Well, let me ask you this. I always like to ask my guests on the show when it comes to leadership. There's so many different ways to define it. If somebody said, Christy, how would you define leadership? What would you respond to that?
I think that true leadership is really about being genuine. It's about being transparent. I think so many people who strive to be leaders or to be thought leaders in certain spaces, I think they do what they think is expected of them, or they say what they think people want to hear
Hmm.
instead of just actually being themselves.
Hmm.
And so for me, it's really about truly being genuine, just being yourself. We say that a lot nowadays. We want people to come to work and bring their whole self. And
Hmm.
I actually mean it. I want that. And so the leaders that I've been around that have really made the most impact on me have been truly just genuine. They've been themselves, and they've also been very humble. Well, one of the best bosses I ever had was a CFO.
Hmm.
And when I was a director of HR, and he said, Christy, I don't know anything about HR. He's like, I'm an accountant. So he's like, I'm going to be here for you, but I'm going to get out of your way. And you tell me what you need. And he kind of met me where I was and just let me do my thing and have the autonomy. And I learned a lot from him, but I also really appreciated that. And it's been almost 7 years that we have not worked together, but we still get together once a quarter and have lunch, and we're still really good friends. I learned that a lot of things from him. And so when I've had people reporting to me, I just meet them where they are. How do you want to communicate? How do you want to get together? How often? What works for you? Would you rather just pick up the phone? Do you care about being on video? I don't like to put a lot of mandates on things like that because I don't really think that they matter. It's really just about getting the communication out. To me, that's really what leadership is.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I was actually thinking about when you're sharing that, what a gift to have a CFO
Yes.
that says, "Hey, I don't know anything about this. I'm going to get out of your way. I'm here to support you." Let me
Yep.
ask you a follow-up question to that, though, because there's probably some people listening right now that don't have that CFO
Right. Right.
saying, "Hey, I don't know." They have the one that says, "Hey, I want to be involved here," and they're a little bit more challenging or difficult. How do you, I don't know, just maybe give a tip to some of the listeners on how do you coach up in those situations?
Being honest and
Yeah.
being direct. I had a CEO and a CFO one time who really struggled because my proposed handbook was 65 pages long. Right? If handbooks are done well and they hit all the marks, they're going to be lengthy.
Mm-hmm.
And they really struggled with the length and they weren't really focusing on the content, you know. And the CFO actually said, "Well, I'd love it to just be like a card that someone could put in their back pocket.
Yeah.
Like that's how small I would love it to be." And I said, "Well, to be honest," I said, if that's what you want, then I don't think we should do this at all because it's really not going to be worth the time and effort to do that. But let me explain how this is actually protection for the company."
Mm.
And a lot of leaders don't understand that a lot of our people things, a lot of our HR policies and projects and things are about risk mitigation for the company. They don't understand that. They think it's about employees having a good time and checking all the boxes on the forms. And so I say, let me explain to you how this handbook could actually get you out of court or actually, keep you from a lot of legal fees or a lot of, unpleasant situations. So if you actually can do that and actually prove, hey, here's how this has worked in the past and here's how, I can actually show you the value of this thing, that really helps them to understand that this really is about protecting them, protecting the company. And so that's one of those things that HR has to be able to shift to represent the company and represent the employees at the same time.
Yeah, I love how you shared. It's all really about education. A lot of
Right.
times, people just don't really understand.
Right.
They're looking at from a different angle, and if you can show them a different lens or a different way to look at things, you can really create a lot of influence. I love that. Hey, you write a blog called "Living in the Gray." How do we lead in this area? How do we make decisions? Talk a little bit about living in the gray.
For a while, I had a team of nearly 20 people who were in the HR payroll and benefits space. And I had a couple different times where people who were on my team had made the comment, "I really hate the gray. I really
Mm,
wish this was more black and white." And the reality is, as we know, HR is not black and white because people are not strictly black and white, right? How many people in your life do you know who are that simple?
mm,
Or everything falls into, just a couple of columns, or they're not complicated. For me, I think the best HR professionals are the ones who can live in the gray
mm.
and who can navigate the gray and who can help educate our leaders on navigating that gray as well. So that's really kind of where the title came from. And, over the years, it's just the things that I have learned has just been helping people navigate through that, helping people understand it, particularly business owners, to understand why these things are important. Because for so long, HR was just looked at as transactional
Yeah.
and just as, ticking the boxes and filling out the forms. And, it's interesting when I've been in job search situations and have been and I've asked the hiring managers, "So what are you really looking for in this role?" "Compliance." Almost all the time is what they
Mm,
say. We're really looking for that. And I'm like, okay, well, that may not necessarily be, I mean, you're gonna get that, but have you thought about the strategic implications of your people strategy? No. 9
mhm.
times out of 10, they have not. So I've always enjoyed writing, and so that was really why I kinda started the blog. The other thing about kind of living in the gray is that I am the parent of a special needs child.
Okay.
And so that has been the gray in my life that I've had to navigate. And so kind of putting those lessons together from work and from personal. And so I write from those perspectives.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think a lot of times when we write, of course, I have a blog as well, and we write not necessarily for others, but for ourselves.
Right.
And then hoping that, hey, you know what, if it helps me, maybe it helps someone else. And you put that out there.
Right.
And is that a weekly or monthly blog, or is that just whenever you feel like sitting down and you got something on your mind?
I have a schedule to post, every other week, but sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But when I started the blog and I sought counsel from a lot of our fellow HR community members who also blog, and several people said, don't let it keep you up at night if you miss the deadline.
Yeah.
If you don't really have anything to say, move on, that day. So
I'm glad you said that, because I want the listeners to hear that, if you maybe some of them have thought about starting a blog, but they're like, I just can't keep it up. But what you're saying is, hey, just start it, do it, what works for you, find your lane.
Yeah.
What works for you. And if you say, hey, I'm going to do it once a month, and you miss a month, you give yourself grace and you pick up the next month, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. I love that. I love that title, Living in the Gray. It sounds like your next book.
Right. I've thought about that.
It's a great title. And when I think about that, I think about, 80% of your decisions are probably in the gray, and, every day. And so as I think about that, I think about, for me, it's always about, I'm one that likes to get a lot of different perspectives, talk to, kind of socialize it, I guess, if you will, and then finally come up with the decision to kind of move forward. But a lot of them, you really don't know how they're going to work out until later in life, right?
And there's so many things within HR as well that are truly based on best practices and precedents. It's not always about laws that are officially signed. The NLRB is a great example of that. Depending on who's sitting in the White House and who gets to appoint a member to that board, you start to see their decisions and their things ebb and flow. And one of the things that I've seen over the last just handful of years that has been in that space is employees posting on social media. For a long time, you had a lot of organizations that had very strict policies that said you can't post, and can't use our name, and we're trying to be very restrictive. And the NLRB will tell you that that's concerted activity and they can do it. But a lot of employers don't know that. And if their HR person isn't staying up on those things and doesn't understand that that's an ebb and flow that you have to stay on top of, that's not necessarily going to be a law that's going to come into your inbox. And so those are the kinds of things that, again, a lot of our job in HR is risk mitigation, is trying to help keep employers out of court.
Hey, one of the things I read on your LinkedIn is you describe yourself as a transformational leader. And transformational, I mean, that's a big word. Talk about that. What does that mean?
I think for me, because I just see myself as being different than so many people that I have come across. Sometimes you have to just do the right thing for the employee or for the situation. And sometimes you just have to toss the policy out the window. And again, you've got to focus on best practices and just be reasonable and rational. And one of my very first bosses put that phrase to me, let's approach things, let's be reasonable and rational, and not make a bigger deal out of things than they need to be. And unfortunately, I still just see so many of my HR peers who kind of go in the other direction with that. And so when I look at how I practice and how I've been able to help business leaders and have helped them transform their people strategy and their culture because of that approach.
And that's a word we're hearing a lot today, right? and when I think about change, I'm currently in the middle of putting together another book around changing lanes. And when I think about changing lanes, I think about development, I think about transition, but I think about transformation. Like as you become more, you transform. I would love to ask you this question around changing lanes, because I think it's harder for some people. And when I think about that, the question I want to ask you is, a lot of times, some of the things you've talked about, and people are like, hey, that sounds good, but it's really hard just to make a change like that. How do people know when they need to change lanes? And when I say that, how do they need to know when they need to do something different, or if they need to just look at things differently?
The biggest thing for me that I found to be helpful in what I talk about when I give my presentations to those groups is really about finding your people, finding your network, finding your 3 a.m. friends. And because it's very lonely out there, especially when you're going through whatever you're going through, whether it's benefits enrollment, whether it's a system change, whether it's doesn't really matter. Nobody else in the organization is going to understand what you're dealing with. They may somewhat be empathetic, but they're not really going to get it. You need to find your fellow HR people who understand this. And we also know that we can't really talk to our spouses and our partners about this for too long before, my husband says, stop HRing me. So that's when you've got to find your people. You've got to find your people. I've been very fortunate through the HR community to where I have an entire network across the country, quite frankly, of people that I call, text, DM, and who do the same back and say, hey, I'm dealing with this situation. What's your take here? Just to get other perspectives. And that's really, really important. And I think that a lot of, particularly those departments of one, they feel like they're on an island and that they have to do it themselves, and they don't. But you got to find your people.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Where do you find your people? I mean, you've done a pretty good job, but you can probably go back to when you didn't know your people.
100%.
How did you start? What would you recommend? I know that you're part of the Twitter chat. You're part of some social media groups, but for those listening that say, you know what, I need to build my network. We've heard about some of the SHRM chapters and associations and mobility and business, different associations, but talk about, maybe give two or three things they can do to find their people.
So back in 2017, I was in a role where, quite frankly, I had a lot of time on my hands. And so that's when I really started. I said, hey, I'm going to purposely start doing some serious networking and just figure out what else is going on out there. And, so I actually would sit down and read the HR magazine, and I actually would visit, the websites. And through all of that, two things happened. One was I went to the Ohio SHRM conference for the first time that year, and I met Mr. Steve Brown, and he introduced me to a whole bunch of other people.
Because that's what he does.
That's what he does. He's the spider. He weaves the webs and gets us all connected. And it was really fantastic. And so, but I purposely, when I went to that conference, I visited the booths, and I didn't just, take the swag. I introduced myself to people.
Yeah.
And I went to sessions and I introduced myself to people, and, got cards and followed up with said people, and actually got on LinkedIn and checked people's profiles out. And so didn't even just say I was going to do it, or I actually purposely did it. The other thing that happened is that I met John Thurman, who was, along with Wendy Daly, the founders of the HR Social Hour podcast and the Twitter chat. And getting started on that Twitter chat absolutely changed the game for me. And I wouldn't be here with you today, Bruce, if I hadn't been on there, because that's how we met. Now, a lot of people will say, I do not need another social media platform to be on, right? And especially with all the stuff going on now with Twitter and Elon Musk and the whole thing, I get it. But I will say what I like about Twitter is that you really can specialize it, because I use Twitter for two things: HR and Ohio State football. My family does not find me on Twitter. All my high school friends aren't on there. So what I do like about it is that you really can specialize it and say, hey, I'm just using it for this purpose. So if anybody hasn't been on there, I encourage them to do it. They can find you, they can find me, and we can introduce them to all kinds of people. But that's really and truly how those things started for me. And then I would, go to other events and actually got to meet some people in real life. And so it just kind of spiraled from there.
Yeah, that's pretty special what John and Wendy started with the HR
Yep.
social hour. What's the if somebody said, "Hey, I'm interested in that," and they just get on Twitter, and how do they find that?
So if they actually, if we put our handles in the show notes or whatnot, but if anybody actually wants to just reach out to me directly, even via
Okay,
email, and say, hey, I
perfect,
don't know how to do this, I'm happy to walk you through it.
excellent, excellent.
Let's get people on there and invite them to the chats. And I tell people, the first couple times you're on those chats, it's overwhelming. You're sitting there going, what is this? John Thurman actually had a nice little guide of how to participate, and so I've sent that to people. And but my tip would just be stick with it, because the more you do it, you'll get it.
Stick with it. I wrote down those 3 words. If you want to know more about how to get involved in the HR community and some of the things Christie's talking about, I'll put the link in the show notes. You reach out to Christie; she'll help you get connected. It's a it's a phenomenal way to connect with people, but even more importantly, to educate yourself on different perspectives. And I love all of that. I've been part of that before, and when I have the time to get on, I jump on. Everybody does a great job on that, and so I appreciate you sharing that. Hey, I want to ask you one final question before I shift to it's time to accelerate. I always like to ask my guests around advice. What have you been given any advice? Maybe it was, with your family or early career or later in your career. It's just so good. You just find yourself sharing that with others.
Really, the phrase that has resonated with me for a lot of years was from a former boss, which was, don't make it a bigger deal than it needs to be. And I think we do that a lot in HR. I think we jump to conclusions. Quite frankly, we're dealing with big stuff, right? We're dealing with things that are, potential legal risks, and there is a lot of liability, and there's a lot of things. But I think, unfortunately, that freezes some people, and they don't know how to work within that and still accomplish things and still be nimble and create a great work environment. But I had a boss who said, don't make it a bigger deal than it is. Deal with what's in front of you and go forward. And Cy Wakeman talks about that a lot in her books and in her podcasts about the stories that we tell ourselves because our egos get in the way. Mm-hmm. And that we're not looking at the facts, and that we make a lot of assumptions. And those things have been really important for me to navigate through over the last 20 years and say, don't start telling yourself stories, start making stuff up. You just got to deal with the facts and what's really right there.
That's great advice. Self-talk is so important.
Yeah.
Many times we're trying to make it a bigger deal than what it really is. And so I guarantee there's somebody out there, they have their pen out, they have their journal out, they've been taking notes, and they just wrote that down. Oh man, I needed to hear that today. Don't make it a bigger deal than it needs to be. This has been so great. Oh my goodness. I'm going to shift to it's time to accelerate. This has been so much fun. Hey, would you rather read a book or listen to a podcast? I know you mentioned a podcast just a few minutes ago. What would you rather do?
I'm a book reader. I read books like they're going out of style.
I love that. Do you have any favorites?
Well, I do a lot of, kind of historical fiction kinds of things. That's kind of my relaxing in the evening,
I like that. It's important to read different books, isn't it?
Right. And especially, as I'm playing with the idea of becoming a real author, I like to see how other folks word things and, different perspectives and different voices. So
that's fantastic. I love that. Hey, let me ask you this. I always talk about great leaders or grateful leaders. What are you grateful for?
Oh, so much. I think one of the first things is I'm a soldier for God, and I have a very strong relationship with the Lord. And I'm just so grateful that back when I was a junior at Ohio State, he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "This is what you're supposed to do." Because a lot of people I know who are still in their 40s and 50s still don't know what they want to do and what they want to be and what their passion and purpose is. And so ultimately I'm grateful for that, because it has just he's just directed my life as he's needed for his purposes. And so I'm very grateful for that.
That's fantastic. And I'm grateful for you being here today and sharing that story for everyone to hear that. Hey, outside of like work, like what energizes you? I think I've heard Ohio State Buckeyes a few times. What else do you like to do?
So I'm an avid worker outer. And so I've been going to Orange Theory Fitness for the last 6 years.
Okay.
So I do that. And then I actually took up running in 2020, and I did my first half marathon this past spring. So I'm a big fitness fanatic.
That felt good to do that half marathon, didn't it?
I've never been so grateful to see the 9-mile marker. I was like, yes.
It's funny. So you mentioned 2020. That's when I downloaded the Couch to 5K.
Okay. Yeah.
I downloaded that with a friend, and we started running. And next thing you know, I ran my first 5K. Then I did a 10K. Then I did a half marathon.
Yep.
And someone said, is the marathon next? And I'm like, I don't think so. That half marathon was exhausting, but it was so fulfilling and so rewarding, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Absolutely.
I love that. I love that. Oh my goodness. This has been so much fun. I've got one final question as we conclude the show. This is probably my favorite question. Christie, 10 years older, is around the corner, and she's knocking at your door, and you are going to go answer that door. What's she going to say to you?
Well, hopefully she's going to start with, an OH or a Go Bucks or something to that effect, because that's how we start. Hopefully something along the lines of, good job and, congrats, and just hope that it all feels great and that you're fulfilling the purpose. So that's really what I would hope for.
Yeah. That's a wiser, 10 years older Christie Engler. I have had so much fun. I've learned so much visiting with you today. I appreciate you coming on the show. Hey, so for those who heard you talk about HR Social Hour, they heard you talk about Twitter chat, they heard you talk about some of the different things, living in the gray. How's the best way for them to connect?
So find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
On Twitter, I'm just Christie_Engler. So it's out there. The blog is Living in the Gray through WordPress. So if you just either start Googling Christie Engler blog or Living in the Gray, it'll come up.
And I'll put those links in the show notes, so it'll be easy for you to find those. And if you do connect with, or when you do connect with Christie, I want you to send her a note and say, hey, I heard you on Life in the Leadership Lane. Here's one of my takeaways, because that makes the connection so much deeper, so much quicker. And again, I appreciate you coming on, just sharing your perspective, your wisdom. I can't wait to see what's ahead for you, Christie. And I know the football season is here. We're all energized and excited. I know I'm excited. We're all 0-0 right now, looking for a championship. So again, I appreciate you, but mostly I appreciate your friendship.
Same. I'm really grateful for you. I've learned a lot through what you put out there, and I'm just so excited for the next generation of HR leaders to learn from all that we've come across.
I love it. Well, listen, you have a great day. I can't wait to share this. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Bruce.